Would ask everyone to take their seats. At this time, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Representative Ballman. Representative Blanton. Here. Representative Bowling. Here. Representative Bridges. Here. Representative Burke.
Here.
Representative Chester Burton. Present. Representative Dossett.
Present.
Representative Dotson. Representative Flannery. Representative Fugate.
Here.
Representative Gentry.
Here.
Representative Grossberg. Representative Johnson.
Here.
Representative McCool. Here. Representative Miles. Here. Representative Smith.
Here.
Representative Williams.
Here.
Representative Wesley.
Here.
Representative White. And Chair Gooch.
Here.
Have a quorum.
Representative Flannery is here. Okay. Well, thank everyone for coming to the meeting today. First, we're going to hear some Senate bills. Senate Bill 213. Senator Higdon. Welcome, and introduce yourself and your guests for the record, and the floor is yours.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I see a lot of familiar faces and some new ones, and thank you all for allowing us to be here this morning. I have Rusty Crast with me here today to as backup for any technical questions you might have about Senate Bill 213. I want to thank Rusty and Tom Fitzgerald and Energy and Environment Cabinet for their work and collaboration to come to an agreement on this bill. Senate Bill 213 deals with biosolids, and it's a particular interest of many cities across the state that take their biosolids, which are nutrient-rich materials that result from the treatment of domestic sewer and sewer sludge. And they're very productive when used for fertilizer, and it helps make the soil more productive, and it's an efficient way to use these products and to get rid of. There's only a couple ways you can get rid of these biosolids. You can incinerate them, which is very expensive. You can put them in a landfill, which is very expensive, or you can land farm them, is what they call it.
Motion on the bill.
Fields.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Tom, you were asked to speak on this too.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Very, very briefly. Tom Fitzgerald, on behalf of the Kentucky Resources Council, I just want to thank the committee for hearing the bill, and I want to thank Senator Higdon for his patience and his graciousness in trying to bring all the parties together on this. Senate Bill 13 preserves the cabinet's flexibility to assure that the land application of municipal sewage sludge doesn't result in contamination of cropland and doesn't result in applications that end up in surface water or groundwater and cause problems for the farmer who is land applying. The last thing I think that anyone wants, either the cities or those of us who work with landowners, want is to have standards where today's land application becomes tomorrow's Superfund liability or tomorrow's nightmare because of the presence in the sludge of industrial chemicals that have no agronomic value but may end up contaminating the cropland. We will be working during the interim to try to develop the regulations. The cabinet has committed to a broad stakeholder process, and I look forward to working with the cities and with Farm Bureau and other interested parties to assure that we try to hit that sweet spot of regulation that is sufficient without being onerous. And so I just want to thank you all for hearing the bill. I want to thank the senator for carrying it and for maintaining the cabinet's flexibility to do what we need rather than just to adopt somebody else's minimum standards. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Do any of the committee members have any questions? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second on the bill. Ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Representative Baumann. Representative Blanton.
Aye.
Representative Bowling.
Yes.
Representative Bridges.
Yes.
Representative Burke.
Yes.
Representative Chester Burton.
Yes.
Representative Dossett.
Yes.
Representative Dotson. Representative Flannery. Representative Fugate?
Yes.
Representative Gentry?
Yes.
Representative Grossberg? Representative Johnson?
Yes.
Representative McCool?
Yes.
Representative Miles?
Yes.
Representative Smith? Representative Wesley? Representative White? Representative Williams?
Yes.
Chair Gooch?
Yes. The bill does pass with favorable expression that same should pass. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you.
Okay, next we're going to take up Senate Bill 226, an act relating to environmental permitting. Senator Johnny Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Johnny Turner. I'm Senator for the 29th District in Harlan, Kentucky, and I'll get the two gentlemen on my left and right to introduce themselves.
Clay Larkin with the law firm of Denton's Bingham Greenbaum.
And Rusty Cress with Dinsmore and Show.
And I'm kind of like my friend just before me. I've got technical people sitting on either side with better legal minds than mine in this field. Mr. Chairman and gentlemen and ladies of the committee, this bill has two perspectives to it. One is time framing. The coal industry, when they're applying, this is primarily for surface mining, when they're applying for permits to perform the mining jobs that's required to remove coal, they have a standard statutory provision in there that says that the cabinet can wait 60 days. They have to file an application. Cabinet has up to 60 days to notify them about that application.
Motion on bill.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the bill. But I would like for him to talk a little bit more about this, because I think one of the things that we all know is that often we want to make sure that our businesses out there that are willing to invest in Kentucky and create jobs are able to timely be able to access the requirements that they need as far as permits and those sort of things. So, Senator, if you don't mind, you can proceed a little.
And I'll try to be short too, ladies and gentlemen. But the permitting process is going to be expedited in the sense that the cabinet can't wait 30 days or 59 days and say, oh, this is an omission on the application. You've got to redo the application and keep this process going. That takes care of that, and there's some timelines and restraints on the cabinet in that. The second problem, or not the problem, the second issue in this case is the permitting process about the water. The Fish and Wildlife, there's a federal act on clean water. This act that we're doing now puts some timelines and some legalese in there to saying that there's a presumption that the water, you got an employer that's mining here and he's just going to move over to the next spot. He's got a history of having qualified with protecting all. You all heard the little dart issue that we have through the protection to the water. It's got some technical language in it. It does provide, if there's a dispute between the two, that they can go for an administrative hearing or go into the local circuit court. So it's just changing the process, making it easier, because as it stands now, you can get a mine shut down and lose 300 and some employees just because of this timeline stuff. And it's been a big problem ongoing. And we've not heard anything from the cabinet that they need more funding for hiring more people to help expedite this. So it's just being now put into place where it should work good for the employer, state of Kentucky, so that we can keep the mining operation going to people being able to work and provide for their families in Eastern Kentucky. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, either of you want to add anything?
No, Mr. Chairman, I'll be happy to answer questions as they roll
Okay.
along.
We do have someone who's, Tom Fitzgerald again has signed up to speak, so if you let Tom come to the. Yes, go ahead. Okay, I appreciate it. Sure, no problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Attorney, so we're looking, as of today, we're looking probably 12 to 14 months on a permitting process. What do you foresee this doing to that timeline?
Thank you. It can be that long based upon the process that the cabinet performs, but this can cut it to 6 months.
Okay.
Yes, this process, if it's handled correctly and expediently with the employer and the cabinet, because to get the application has been the biggest problem, it appears, from the cabinet not telling them quick enough, you got a little omission, fix that and we can go on with the application. That's one problem. And then the water problem is being taken care of also with this bill. So
All right, thank you, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Let's see, we do have a motion in this second on the bill, is that correct? Tom, I will give you a moment to speak on the bill before we call the roll.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've been sitting here whittling on my comments while the bill's been introduced. My concern, and I've shared these concerns with Senator Turner, and so he's aware of the concerns. If Section 1 of this bill is implemented, it will interfere with the cabinet's ability to properly apply the state water quality standards when it's writing permits for discharges into water bodies that have federally protected species. The effect of the bill, I'm concerned, and I wanted to share with you, it will be the exact opposite of what the sponsor intends, which I understand to be an expectation of a timely decision on permit applications that have complete and sufficient information. That is a reasonable expectation, and one that I share. But the result of Section 1 will be the exact opposite. Either the cabinet's going to try to apply the presumptions that are created and the limitations, in which case EPA will likely demand to review every one of these permits, which is its discretionary ability, and the other agencies that rely on the state to do the water quality portions of these permits will increase their scrutiny rather than relying on the state, resulting in even greater delay. And third-party challenges from groups that have a focus of doing nothing but protecting endangered species will likely increase as well. If the state can't do what the legislature has asked it to do, which is to manage these discharge permit programs under a federal delegation, then it is quite possible we'll face a challenge to the delegated status of that program, and EPA may write the permits in Atlanta, which is something I don't think anybody wants. Alternatively, the cabinet is going to determine that it can't implement Section 1 because there's language that says that this is required to the extent consistent with the Clean Water Act, which I believe it's not. In which case we'll end up with another case like Westlake Chemicals, where a couple of years ago we passed a bill that couldn't be implemented, and we came back this session and you all passed a bill which is now in the Senate to try to fix the problem. So my concern is the bill is not consistent with our obligations that we voluntarily chose to take on under the Clean Water Act, and will result in unworkable situation and will not further the protection of the species that is now, it's a 50-year commitment that Congress made. There were a total of 4 negative votes in the House and the Senate to pass the Endangered Species Act back in 1973. Which is a remarkable bipartisan effort. It was signed into law by a Republican president. So those are my concerns, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to go into any details on the problems with the bill. I just want you all to be aware that if the goal is to streamline or expedite the permitting process, this will have exactly the opposite effect, because it asks the cabinet to do things that they cannot do under our delegated authority under the Clean Water Act. Happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Okay.
And thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the time.
Senator Turner, do you want to respond to that?
there's a provision, I'll read them just so everybody can look at them herself. What he's talking about is this one provision says, presume that the water quality will be maintained and protected if the applicant complies with technology-based effluent limitations. That's one section. The other section is a protective section. It says, in determining whether lowering the water quality, they will give substantial weight to any evidence submitted by the applicant that discharge or similar operations from what they've done before. Most of the time, this permitting is permitting from one side. They can bond and permit one section. They just jump to the next section right beside of it. And they have a history of complying with all that laws. And then it says the cabinet's not to impose any more conditions more stringent required by the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, which is appropriate. So I think this bill is self-protective, and I like my good friend Tom, but I disagree with him in this, because I wrote this thing so that it says plainly, and I just read those to you. So those are protective provisions to protect both the aquifers and the employer and the cabinet.
Representative Gentry, do you have a question?
My question has been addressed, Mr. Chair, thank you.
Any other questions? Ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Representative Ballman? Yes. Representative Blanton?
Aye.
Representative Bowling? Yes. Representative Bridges?
Yes.
Representative Burke?
No.
Representative Chester Burton?
No.
Representative Dossett?
Yes.
Representative Dotson?
Yes.
Representative Flannery?
Yes.
Representative Fugate?
Yes.
Representative Gentry?
No.
Representative Grossberg?
No.
Representative Johnson?
Yes.
Representative McCool?
Yes.
Representative Miles?
Yes.
Representative Smith?
Yes.
Representative Wesley?
Yes.
Representative White? Representative Williams?
Yes.
And Chair Gooch.
Yes. Okay, the bill does pass with favorable expression that same should pass. Representative Bowman, would you like to cast a yes vote or a vote on Senate Bill 213? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank
Chairman
you.
Gooch, I would as well. I'd like to record a yes vote.
Okay. Anyone else? Yes.
I would like to record a no vote on 213.
213. Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and
so
ladies and
much.
gentlemen of the committee.
All right. Next, we're going to take up for discussion only Senate Bill 4. Senator Mills, are you here? All right.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Morning.
I'm Robbie Mills. I'm a state senator from the 4th District in Northwest Kentucky. Today we're looking at, for discussion only, Senate Bill 4. Mr. Chairman, it doesn't take a genius to realize that our once trustworthy and reliable electrical grid is headed into uncharted territory that will undoubtedly include blackouts, voluntary shutdowns, and a general loss of public faith in our power grid. Senate Bill 4 is all about protecting our nation's power grid. This bill is an attempt to be proactive from a state level and to speak up for our constituents. We are accustomed to reliable, affordable electricity, and our constituents fear both of these may no longer be available in Kentucky. The nation's largest power grid operator, PJM, has recently warned of a major coming shortfall in electric generation capacity. PJM recently published new analysis that showed power plant retirements outpacing new power additions in the coming years that could leave its service area, which includes most of Kentucky, short of thousands of megawatts of capacity by 2030. Add to this our nation's growing demand for electricity, including thousands of new electric vehicles coming online, and you have a recipe for disaster. Utilities are under increasing pressure from the Biden administration and investors to phase out fossil fuel resources, especially coal, for the sake of mitigating climate change. This pressure from the federal government includes very attractive financial incentives and Wall Street investment strategies that constantly push for the retirement of fossil fuel-fired power plants. Senate Bill 4 is a state-level attempt to secure for our constituents reliable, affordable, and resilient electricity, and to help make sure that our fossil fuel-fired power plants, which provide, in my opinion, the most reliable, affordable, and consistent form of power, are not retired prematurely and contribute to our coming capacity deficit. Senate Bill 4 sets up a presumption against the retirement of a fossil fuel-fired electric generation unit unless the utility can prove to the PSC that the utility will replace the retired unit with new electric generating capacity that is dispatchable, maintains or improves the reliability and resilience of the transmission grid, and that it maintains the minimum reserve capacity requirements established by the utility's reliability coordinator. That the retirement will not harm the utility ratepayers. Let me repeat that again. they have to prove that the retirement will not harm the utilities ratepayers. And finally, that the decision to retire the fossil fuel-fired electric generating unit is not the result of any financial incentives or benefits offered by a federal agency. Finally, Mr. Chairman, Senate Bill 4 also sets up what I think is going to be very valuable annual reporting mechanism by the PSC to us, to the LRC, that will detail the number of retirement requests and whether they were approved or denied, the impact of any approved retirements, and finally, if the retirements resulted in any stranded costs for the ratepayer that will have to be recovered by surcharges on the customer's bill. At this point, we really don't know what's going on in this field, and we need to know, and I think this reporting mechanism will bring us up to date on that. The opponents of Senate Bill 4 are saying that this bill will lead to higher energy rates and less reliable service because it will prevent utilities from shutting down fossil fuel power plants. The truth is, Senate Bill 4 is needed to make sure utilities are not closing power plants too soon and subsequently increasing rates to customers, as with the Big Sandy plant closure that resulted in drastic rate increases. Senate Bill 4 allows the PSC to ensure that the retirement and replacement capacity will not harm the grid or Kentucky's ratepayers through increased risk of power outages and increased costs. Senate Bill 4 provides a common sense approach to ensure important decisions that affect our grid and cost to consumers are highly scrutinized by the PSC. Mr. Chairman, I believe Senate Bill 4 is the proper reaction from this governing body. We must do all we can to protect citizens that we represent, and putting regulations in place that will help ensure reliable, resilient electrical service for our constituents moving forward, I think is a great first step. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions that may be out there, or I can wait until the other side gives their presentation and then we can answer questions. But I appreciate you letting us bring some education forth on this. I believe this is a very important bill. It's a kind of a paradigm shift in energy policy in Kentucky, and I think it's very much needed. So be happy to do whatever your directions are.
Thank you, Senator. Please stay at the table for now. I want to thank you for bringing this bill because I do think it's very important. I've been here a long time, and I've seen a lot of changes. And one of the things that we have seen increased utility costs ever since I've been here, and mostly that was a result of fuel switching. Yeah. And that fuel switching was done because someone thought it was okay for ratepayers to pay a little more because they wanted to achieve some type of political end, objective, or whatever. And but now, when we try to push back, and those of us that feel like that, it probably is okay to pay a little bit more for reliability, because if we don't have reliability, then we have possibility of people dying. We've seen it happen in other states. Our people's lives are disrupted. I've been in Kentucky all my life, and I had never ever seen what we saw in December, when utilities were actually cutting people off without any notice or warning. And I understand their desire and their ability to do that in order to keep the entire grid from collapsing and going down, because then you could have
big problems,
maybe weeks or whatever before you can get power back on, and that would be really detrimental. But I think this is a discussion that we should have, and so I thank you for bringing this bill. And we have a couple of members that have asked to speak. Representative Blanton.
Chairman, if you allow, I'd like to wait till the other.
Okay. Representative Fugit. You want to ask your question now, Representative Burke?
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. I would like to ask a question of the sponsor.
Sure.
I'm looking at Section 2, Subsection 2, Parts B and C. You had recited those for us, but for those who don't have the bill in front of them, that's the admonition that a retirement of a coal power plant would not harm the ratepayers. And it would also, in Part C, not be a result of any financial incentives or benefits offered by a federal agency. My question is this: aren't those two provisions internally self-defeating? If we say that the plants cannot take a benefit and that we want the rates to stay low, wouldn't taking a benefit help to decrease rates for buyers of power?
Right. Yeah, my position in this bill is that is one of the that's the issue. One of the issues at hand is that the federal government is basically incentivizing the shutdown of coal-fired plants. And while that is important to my region in the state, the biggest issue is that it's incentivizing what I consider to be an inferior fuel source going forward, whether it's renewables or whether it's gas. Gas has problems with pipelines and delivery systems right now. So that's what one of the main issues and points of this bill is that the federal government is incentivizing changes on the state of Kentucky that I don't think is best for the state of Kentucky or our constituents, that lead to problems like we saw and could lead to more problems. Even PJM is suggesting that even the minorest of problems are going to result in major disruptions to the grid. So that would be my response to your question. Thank you.
Representative Flannery.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a two-part question. Am I correct in saying that reliability and resilience is not a factor that can be considered by the PSC?
Yes. I mean, they typically look at cost and customer service, but reliability is not, in my opinion, reliability is much lower on the scale in the decision-making factor than cost is. One of the other things we're trying to do with this bill is try to bring reliability and cost up equal. As the chairman said, a couple pennies more to make sure that the lights come on, I think is very valuable. I mean, we all rely on reliable energy every day. We tout it as a state. And if we can't deliver that and give the faith that it's going to be there when we flip the switch, I think our constituents are missing the boat, and we're underserving our constituents by allowing that to happen.
Okay, second question based on that. Do you know if any of our sister states have a reliability, resiliency factor that are used by comparable entities, with their whatever their regulating authority on utilities, whatever it may be called?
I do not. I mean, we mentioned the reliability coordinator. I know each utility has an organization or a person in-house that watches after reliability and has a reliability coordinator, but I believe that it needs to be more globally looked at and brought into equal with price and cost.
Thank you.
Representative Dodson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Mills, for bringing this today. I wish we were voting on it instead of discussing it, because I think it's very important. Anyhow, could you explain the process if a coal-fired plant is deemed to be inoperable? Who makes the determination that to be decommissioned as to where it can be repaired and brought back to a place of normalcy to where they can be utilized? That it's not so cost prohibitive.
That may be a better question for the experts that come behind me from the utility company to answer, but in general, the PSC does not tell a utility whether they can shut down or decommission or retire a plant. There are some decisions that the PSC might help that utility make, dealing with recovering costs and things of that nature in that process, but they're not involved in the retirement decision at this point. This bill brings the PSC into that equation, brings more scrutiny to whether a power plant should shut down or not, and I think that's one of the main points of the bill as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. I think that one of the things that's frustrating to me is that so many people don't really understand that different sources of utilities have a reliability factor. And, you know, one of the reasons that we have enjoyed very cheap electricity in this state for so many years is that, you know, we relied on what was available to us in Kentucky. And for a long time, that was coal. And, you know, when you build a coal-fired power plant, it's designed to run at about 85% efficiency 7 days a week, you know, 24 hours a day, all the time. And you have a fuel source on site. You know, that coal stockpile is there, you know, and so as long as that stockpile's there, there is fuel to generate electricity not only today, but tomorrow or next week or whatever. Then, you know, we've seen a huge fuel shift to natural gas. I like natural gas. I heat my home with it. It's a great fuel for our industries, and in some cases, it's okay fuel. Even though President Carter in the 70s said that it was too valuable a fuel to generate electricity. But at any rate, you hook a gas-fired power plant to a pipeline, and as long as there's a constant flow of and pressure, we've now heard that it not only has to be gas supply, it also has to be pressure that's adequate to generate electricity just in time. And so that gas arrives just in time to generate electricity. We also know that, you know, we wish we had more hydro in this state. That's pretty much the base load as far as I'm concerned, because you have the fuel source behind the dam, and that is fuel that can generate electricity. But when you look at some of these renewables, the intermittent sources, they have more of an efficiency factor of 15, 18 at the most, 20. Probably less than 20, just because you know they're only there when the wind's blowing or the sun's shining, and we have no ability to store that electricity. And you can generate a lot of electricity, maybe even cheaply at times when you don't need it. That's right. But without the ability to store it for a later date, there is not reliability there. And so, you know, I just don't understand how so many people don't understand that you can't replace, you know, the math doesn't work to replace a 85 or 90% efficient unit with 17 or 20%. It just doesn't work. Even if you build 5 of them, you may not have the electricity at the time that it's needed. So I think that's what so many people want to do is, you know, they want to say, well, we'll build 5 times as many, and that way, you know, we got as much efficiency. Well, no, not necessarily, because it's not necessarily generated at the time that you need it. And that's what reliability is. I've said it several times. Reliability is the ability of utilities to generate and dispatch electricity when and where it's needed. And that's just something that has to happen. And if we have to pay a premium in this country to make that happen, then I'm certainly willing to have that conversation. So I thank you for bringing this bill. It's that next one. Representative Grossberg.
Thank you. I have a question. When Big Rivers closed the coal unit, it appears to have been entirely a business decision because the expense of having maintained it and retrofitting it was far more than what the return on investment would have been. Had they been forced to keep it open, who exactly would have paid for that maintenance and retrofitting, and how would we have kept that expense from being passed on to the ratepayers ultimately?
Well, maybe you know more about the Big River situation than I do. I'm not completely aware that it was a business decision. But, you know, I would say that this would go through the process that the bill lays out. If they came to the PSC and asked to close it and they were replacing it, needed to replace it, they'd have to go through the process here. You know, all that, we're not looking for a decision. We're looking toward the process of, you know, is reliability gonna drop? Is the cost going to go up to the consumers? I'm not particularly aware that was a business decision. I think that they were caught in the same things that all of our utilities are caught in, is that they were enticed, incentivized to close that down and to rely on the power grid for their source. And we've got too many electric utilities doing that, relying on the grid and not on base load generation that we're so used to. So I'll look into that for sure, but I don't think that the Big Rivers closure was a specific business decision.
Let me
Sure.
respond in a way. Often what happens is we have regulations coming from federal, some of it's from the EPA and other sources, and what often happens is that hopefully if EPA in their desire to lower emission standards or whatever, they may require that utilities put on certain equipment to make those reductions. And hopefully when they do that, they will actually use available technology before they make those mandates. And we saw that in 1990 with the Clean Air Act, where West Kentucky was hurt right after that because we had high sulfur coal. And East Kentucky didn't, so they were kind of benefited from that. But what happened is the technology really was there. It was expensive, but it was there. And what the utilities actually put the scrubbers on that took out the SOx and the NOx and the particulate matter and the soot and those things, and actually over the years have decreased those items about 80 or 85%. So the technology was there. The utilities were able to make that investment and still meet the requirements that were met. But when the Obama administration came in and they set new standards for, I think it was Section 111D and 111B of the Clean Air Act, one pertaining to existing power plants, one pertaining to new power plants, they actually set standards that there was no technology there to meet those standards.
Yeah.
And that, in my opinion, is where we got here, when the standards that they were setting for coal was just about what could only be met by natural gas. And that was a real problem. And so I think that's why we saw this fuel switch, is that, we could build a natural gas plant that could meet the standards, and based on the cost of natural gas at that time, and the idea, I guess nobody knows what the cost is going to be 20 years from now, but there was kind of a good faith leap that they had to do it, and so I think that the real question is that the amount of the cost, who bears the cost. What the cost is going to go up often is a result of federal regulations that the utilities have very little control over. I think sometimes they probably should have fought back more. At least now we have an attorney general that is willing to sue that we haven't had in recent years, to try to protect Kentuckians in that way. But that's just my response.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that this bill is really is our effort to say, hey, we want to have some pushback on the federal EPA and their regulations and these incentives that are out there to rapidly, before the time is up, close down these fossil fuel powered plants. So,
Representative Grossberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That provides the clarity that I was looking for, because yes, there are incentives on one hand, but on the other, there are presently unfunded mandates, and I'm just curious what's going to happen once this bill passes and there are federal mandates that don't allow these plants to continue operating, and retrofitting would have an inordinate expense. Someone has to bear that expense. Are we, the General Assembly, going to bear that expense? Are the ratepayers going to bear that expense? Or are we going to wind up, if this bill passes, passing a new bill that undoes this and just allows the plants to close so that we don't have the high ratepayer expenses to maintain the plants that are trying to meet federal regulations based upon outmoded technology.
And you know, one of the things that this bill is going to do is actually bring that discussion more to the public, to be honest with you. For several years, we've asked the questions, you know, well, how much does it cost? You've got to shut down a power plant. How much does it cost to scrub the coal versus, you know, show us your math. And what we're told from utilities is that, you know, we've studied it in depth. We know this is the best approach. Requiring it to go to the PSC and have that discussion where we actually know what those costs are and that we know that it's being compared, then I think that brings a little more clarity and comfort to the public. It does to me. So, good questions, though. Very good questions.
Okay. We have a couple of questions. Go ahead.
This is not the question I had. I want to make a statement about the conversation that's going on. I would point out, if the gentleman's not aware, that we, a few years ago, had one of these coal-fired plants, the Big Sandy plant, that shut down up in my region of the state. And I can tell you who's paying for that shutdown, and it's the ratepayers. As a matter of fact, it's added onto their bills every month, and they're having to pay for that. So them shutting this plant down is already costing the ratepayers more in cost for their utility bills. So, you know, to say that not putting this basically this moratorium on is not going to cost more in that realm, because the ratepayers are already paying more when these things shut down, because they are left holding the bag of the cleanup process in these locations.
Right. Thank you. What we're going to have to do, there is a meeting in this room at 10 o'clock, so I'm going to, Representative Dossett, do you have a question? And then I'm going to bring up some people who did ask to speak on this bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a quick comment, and I want to compliment Senator Mills for the legislation that he's brought forward. And I think the goal, and it has been mentioned right here, is to correct the mistakes that were made in the past. We have no further to look there than what happened during over the Christmas holidays with the brownouts that impacted us in Christian County. Conversation I had with utility representatives, we are blessed in Christian County with 2 industrial parks and a third one about to come online. My question is, with the utility representatives, was if that had not happened at the holidays when those factories were already closed, what was going to be the impact? And he told me they had already planned a shutdown to every industry there in Christian County, which that would also go statewide if these brownouts were to impact us statewide. The impact that would have on our economy, on our public as a whole. When we saw our electric go off at home there over the holidays every 2 hours for 30 minutes at a time, not to mention the damage that would be happening to our appliances and essential things such as heating and cooling units at our homes. What would be those impacts? So I want to thank you for what you brought forward, and I'm looking forward to the time we are able to vote on this legislation. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. At this time, I'd like to allow John Suisse from Duke Energy and Kent Blake from LGE and KU to come forward and present on Senate Bill 4. Gentlemen, welcome. Introduce yourself, and the floor is yours for about 7 minutes.
Understood. My name is Kent Blake. I'm a vice president with LGE and KU.
And I'm John Swez, managing director of Generation Dispatch and Trading for Duke Energy.
And I've got some prepared remarks. I'll be quick, but in listening to the discussion so far, to the extent that I don't pick those up, I'd be happy whether it's at this session or separately to meet with any of you, because I may have a little bit different take on some of the comments and some of the questions that have been asked so far. But thank you for your time this morning, for allowing me to comment on Senate Bill 4. We're certainly supportive of the stated intent of the bill. to support reliability in the state. LG&E and KU have provided reliable service at some of the lowest rates in the nation and in the state for decades. However, we believe that Senate Bill 4 does have unintended consequences and will lead to higher energy rates and potentially less reliable service. I've heard reasons given to support Senate Bill 4. Some believe it addresses reliability concerns on the heels of Winter Storm Elliott during the holidays. It does not, and we believe there are better ways to accomplish that. Others believe it supports the coal industry in the state. It does not necessarily do that either, and we believe there are better ways to accomplish that. And support of a couple of companies in the state should not be at the expense of our more than 1 million customers. We believe the Commonwealth would be better served if everyone stands down on the various pieces of various number of Senate bills meant to address service and affordability of electric service that have been proposed during this session, and instead get together in a collaborative fashion during the interim so that we can come back to you next session with a piece of legislation that everyone should feel comfortable supporting. In terms of what Senate Bill 4 actually does, it presumes that keeping the existing fossil fuel generating units open is the right answer without considering the age, condition, required incremental investment in those units, or whether there are more efficient means of providing that same degree of reliable supply. In contrast, existing practice that has served Kentucky well for more than a century involves least cost planning. Under least cost planning, a utility considers all combinations of energy supply to meet customer demand reliably. And among those reliable alternatives, it selects the portfolio that results in the lowest cost for customers under any number of future scenarios. My company is actually in the middle of a proceeding right now doing just that. We've got 3 coal-fired units that because of incremental investment and their current economics, it does not make sense from a customer's perspective to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in those plants that were built in the 70s. So these plants are all in the between 50 and 60 years old. Instead, we're proposing that power be replaced with much more efficient natural gas combined cycle units. Our analysis shows that under a base set of fuel prices and scenarios, that replacing those units is $600 million more beneficial for our customers, lower cost. And depending on your assumptions for fuel prices, that could be as low as $300 million less expensive. It could be as much as $3.5 billion less expensive. And all of those scenarios assume there is no cost ever put on CO2 emissions. We're not embedding that into our analysis right now. We show it as a sensitivity, but it's not in our base analysis. So the result of changing that I would say, let's evaluate all alternatives as opposed to putting our thumb on the scale a little bit and not creating that level playing field that exists today, will be higher rates that put existing industry and economic development in the state at risk. In addition, in establishing the need for generation resources, existing statutes include a concept avoiding wasteful duplication. Senate Bill 4 is inconsistent with this statute. Senate Bill 4 could have utilities charging customers for units that are no longer needed to reliably serve customers, units that can't run due to environmental laws and regulations, or having multiple older, less efficient units when a newer, more efficient unit provides the same or greater reliability at a lower cost. Technology evolves, and at some point it's time to trade in equipment for a newer, more efficient model. It's not coincidental that of our units today, the 2 units that run the highest percentage of the time are a natural gas combined cycle unit that we put in Louisville in 2015, and a supercritical coal-fired unit that we put in Trimble County at the beginning of 2011. Again, every unit, technology advances, units are more efficient over time. In summary, we understand that there are some concerns about the nature and pace of what many refer to as an energy transition. This transition has certainly been fast-paced in some states, but those are states that have adopted policies that expedite that transition. Kentucky is not one of those states. You have time to be more thoughtful about a holistic piece of legislation that sets the course for Kentucky's energy future in a way that preserves reliability and affordability. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, did you want John to speak, or do you want us to take questions, or?
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative, for allowing me to speak today about Senate Bill 4.
Just hit that. There you go.
How about that?
That's better.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Sorry about that. Thank you for allowing me to speak on Senate Bill 4. My background is an engineer. I started out in coal plants, and my current job is with kind of the things we talked a little bit about earlier about commitment and dispatch of power plants. So that's what I do every day to make sure we have affordable, reliable, and safe provision of electricity to our customers. So some of the things earlier we talked about was energy markets and how it works. I want to get in briefly about dispatch and commitment of power plants and what I think some of the results of this bill would be. So energy markets. So what we do every day is we actually look at all the different, it's a complex process. We look at all the different things that go into the cost of a power plant. And we look at the commodity cost, the availability of the power plant, how much our customers demand, the power markets, the price of power, the efficiency of the heat rate of that power plant. And we make a decision every day to either turn on and turn off these plants. And that's called commitment. And then once that's done, now we look at dispatch. And dispatch is, the electricity in this room is being generated literally the exact same second, right? There's no storage like Chairman mentioned earlier on the grid. But that dispatch moves those power plants up and down to allow that electricity generated to supply that electricity need. So every few seconds we are doing this in our computers, and we're looking at the electric load and we're dispatching power plants. What I believe would happen with this bill were to pass is not only a reduction in reliability, but actually an increase in cost. So I think it's actually counterintuitive, and I'll explain why. So what happens over time is, as mentioned, technology changes and tends to get better, right? Efficiencies of power plants get better. Efficiency is an important component of the cost of a power plant. So the commodity cost times the efficiency, plus variable maintenance costs and the reagents and chemicals and all those things equal to the variable cost of a power plant. Over time, our models show that variable costs of some plants, obviously they are projections, but they change and they're expected to go up over time. At the same time, power markets, especially the connection they have to the price of natural gas, does move, the power markets move up and down, but they're expected to, stay similar. So over time, these older plants that are not allowed to be replaced tend to run less and less. And so you would have coal plants, or fossil plants, that run less and less, and essentially they become like a peaker or a unit that's turned on for that sharp spike in electric demand. And the problem is, these plants aren't built for that. These plants are, like the chairman mentioned, typically designed for an 85, 80, 75, whatever percent capacity factor. They're designed to run. And so when you have them not running, and yes, you can attempt to turn them on, when it gets really cold, like it was in December. You can attempt to turn them on, and you can even start them up a month ahead of time or a week ahead of time to make sure they're good to go. But things do happen when plants sit and don't run. So that's my concern, is that then you save them for essentially, because they're not going to run as much, you save them, and then they're not there when you actually need them. So reliability actually decreases. So I don't think we want these fossil plants to become peaking plants. And then my last point is, Duke Energy Kentucky is part of PJM. Like as mentioned by Senator Mills, PJM did recently put a report out about their concerns over reliability and the changing transmission of the electric grid. the problem is this bill affects Kentucky only, right? Duke Energy Kentucky is part of PJM. They're all 190,000 megawatts, and it's 17 states or whatever. This bill has no effect on the reliability of the the rest of PJM, of course, because those not in Kentucky. So what happens is if PJM has a reliability issue, right, and they have a mismatch, or essentially they have generation of X and they have higher load, as we know, they're going to have to shed load. And the problem is that Duke Energy Kentucky would actually shed a piece of that load, even if we didn't have we had enough generation to serve our load, we would actually be forced to shed load as part of PJM. So those are some of the consequences I see of Senate Bill 4, and thank you for allowing me to speak today.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have to leave. We don't have time for any questions. I do let the committee members, you don't have, what?
Mr. Chairman, could I just amend my vote on SB 213 to a yes, please?
Yes, you can.
Thank you.
Representative White, do you want to record votes for Senate Bill 213 and Senate Bill 226? Okay, that's fine.
Not right now.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much. I do expect that we probably will vote on this bill, and thank everyone for being here. The discussion has been good, and